Welcome to our first reading of Module 4. We're going to start this module with a very complex reading of Hegel. It is alternately called Lord and Bondsman or Master and Slave. This reading, I think, is fundamental for us to be able to criticize some of the ideas that are brought forth by social contract theorists, not only social contract theorists like um, Locke and Hobbes, but also social contract theories like Hegel, before him Immanuel Kant, who believe that reason is the end of it all. Reason is the one thing that is going to make us bring forth the best possible world for everyone. And one of the things that I mentioned in that other PowerPoint on social contract theory and its aftermath is that the reason they're speaking of is a very Western centric sort of reason that is still very dismissive of the margins and still today remains sort of that way. So the reason why I chose Hegel is because he is one of my favorite philosophers, but obviously that's not reason enough. So he is extremely influential for the Marxist project, and we're going to read a little bit of Marx later on. He is also really influential in the critique that Freud has in his book Civilization and Its Discontent. So Hegel is the perfect point of confluence between the social contract theories that we were reading and newer social contract theorists and critiques of that state. So Hegel was born in 1770 and he died in 1831. This means that he is a thinker of the modern period and he is going to use scientific method or scientific models in order to better present his ideas of philosophy. He is considered a German idealist, which means that he is in that German tradition where ideas and not things in themselves are what have a more perfect reality attached to them. His philosophical model, as I mentioned a second ago, is more scientifically oriented, and he is not the first one who develops this, but he definitely creates a system in which, through a dialectical process, he's going to try to corroborate or make some concepts even clearer to observe. For example, if Hegel were trying to define what a phone is, he would have a series of different um, examples of phones and compare and contrast each one of them. And by that analysis, he would start extracting the fundamental characteristics that a phone, regardless of other functions that it might have, he would start extracting all of those characteristics that a phone has. This term by which he extracts what it is from what is not is called a negative dialectic. The process creates not only a progress in line, but a sort of spiral double check system in which ideas are clearly corroborated with one another. Hegel, as I mentioned before, is influenced by social contract theorists. He's also influenced by the history of his time, with will include the conquest that Napoleon had. He is going to be deeply influenced by Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential figures of all time, to be honest. But he's also going to be influenced by his friends. Friedrich von Schelling is another German idealist, and he and Hegel talked a lot about the different theories that they had and how they were approaching these philosophical issues. Frederick Holderlin, a romantic poet, is also going to be influential in the way in which Hegel sees history and art. Holderlin is actually going to be really important for a lot of various German philosophers, not to forget that Nietzsche and Heidegger talk about him. So Hegel is this modern figure that is sort of at the other end of enlightenment, where the project has already taken a very steady ground and has processed in such a way that it can see itself not being correct. He, as I mentioned, became a huge influence for Marx, who, according to one of my professors, misinterpreted precisely this part, master and slave, and that's what allows him to write his Communist Manifesto, but also his one of his most important volumes, Das Kapital. We're going to read a little bit of Marx, and before we do that reading, I'll remind you of some of the things that Hegel says and some of the interpretations that Marx had on that thought. But that makes Hegel the most essential to know if we really think that Marx made a mistake and he misunderstood the relations that capital have with the way in which we live life. And lastly, Hegel influences the Frankfurt Circle and the hermeneutic circle. So he's going to be a huge figure for the development of philosophy in Germany, Austria, and some of the people who are going to be influenced by him are Marcuse, Marx, Kierkegaard, not Kierkegaard, sorry, Heidegger. To a certain degree, this influence carries a little bit to other postmodern philosophers who are actually trying to the effects, undo the effects his philosophy had. Some of his famous writings are The Phenomenology of the Spirit, Science of Logic, Philosophy of Right. He also wrote on aesthetics and history, and his writings on history are just as enlightening as his general philosophical writings. The Phenomenology of the Spirit is one of the most complex books people have read. A lot of the philosophers that Hegel influenced are still debating whether or not they are interpreting him correctly. So if you felt frustrated by trying to understand Hegel, you are not alone on this task. One of the things that you need to know in order to better understand what it is Hegel is doing is to comprehend that the the word phenomenology is actually a very precise and indicative word of what the project actually carries within. Phenomenology is the term that philosophers have used in order to express the way in which we interpret the world, in which we live our lives. So when Hegel talks about the phenomenology of the spirit, he definitely wants to know how this spirit has become present in our lives. That stands in opposition to the noumenal world, which is the world in which the spirit usually inhabits, which would be that world of essences, of the beyond, of things that we cannot easily comprehend or understand. My PowerPoint says that we only experience, but I don't mean experience as in we have factual information, but we think that there is an essence, we think that there is a soul, we think that there is a reality that's beyond this reality in which we see ourselves. So we think that I have a phenomenal reality through which you guys see me as this voice that talks to you from time to time, or that thing or person that's behind a computer typing comments on your homework. That's my phenomenal reality. I also happen to be a Latina woman who is a professor at CUNY LaGuardia in New York, who lived in Mexico for most of her life. So those are phenomenal traces that I have. But if you believe that there is a noumenal reality, then I also have a soul or an essence that makes me who I am. And it is, if you remember in the project of the enlightenment, it is in that noumenal reality that we all share the same sort of characteristics, that we share these ideas of freedom, justice, and equality. So this is a project that Hegel has in mind. How does the spirit of a nation, the spirit of what exists, this bigger, broader idea of awareness, how does that become embodied? So this is what my copy of Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit looks like. I would never make you read the whole thing. Uh, One of my professors once said that he reads that before he goes to bed, and we all looked at him like he was crazy. Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit has these really interesting turns of events. If you read him as a narrative, then he is trying to tell you the origins in which the spirit happens to exist in this metaphysical level and how it comes to our reality. For some philosophers, this obviously has Christian connotations, but for our class, we're not going to pay attention to those, and we're just going to work on what it means to become one person. What does it mean for me to realize that I am this person who I claim to be? So a brief note before we start with this lecture. Terms such as unconscious and subconscious do not exist at this point. Those points are going to come up with Freud later on. We do have the word consciousness, which means an awareness, an idea that things exist or that I exist. And for Hegel, there is, do not forget about this, master and slave do not happen in an embodied reality, they happen at a metaphysical one. When we are born, when spirit becomes phenomena, it already has these traits of master or slave. So we'll start our next presentation or our next bit on YouTube right here.